Hello, and welcome to Introduction to Psychology. This presentation will continue our exploration of the topic of social psychology. It will continue our look at social relations, the way we connect with other people. One way in which we connect with others is by being pro-social. Pro-social behaviour can be defined as voluntary behaviour that is carried out to benefit others. That is, it is the intentional giving of help. According to Batson, 1994, there are 4 distinct motivations for giving help. The first motivation is egoism, helping out of self-interest. That is, sometimes we help others in order to secure a benefit for ourselves. For example, a doctor might help a patient in order to get paid, or a person might donate to charity in order to get a free gift. The second motivation is altruism, helping out of empathy. Altruism is the willingness to do something that benefits another person, even if it harms themselves. Sometimes we help others because we can imagine how a person in need is feeling. For example, a parent might help a child with his or her homework because the parent doesn't want the child to feel confused. The third motivation is collectivism, helping out of group interest. Collectivism is the desire to increase the welfare of a valued group without expecting personal benefit for doing so. For example, an individual might volunteer for a cancer charity in order to benefit all cancer sufferers because he or she thinks that they are worthy of help. The fourth motivation is principlism, helping out of a sense of morality. Principlism is the desire to uphold a moral belief. Sometimes we help others because we think that it is the right thing to do. For example, a person might volunteer to teach overseas because they believe that everyone has the right to an education. There are many situations in which people act pro-socially. When witnesses to an emergency situation offer assistance, it is known as bystander intervention. The dominant model of such behaviour is the bystander intervention model of Latani and Dali, 1970. The bystander intervention model is a model outlining the 5 steps that bystanders go through when deciding whether or not to intervene in an emergency situation. It was developed by psychologists Bibb Latani and John Dali after they read a newspaper article about the murder of Kitty Genovese in 1964. The New York Times reported that Kitty was attacked outside her home in Kew Gardens, stabbed numerous times in 3 separate attacks by the same assailant, and left to die. The New York Times reported that 38 of her neighbours were aware of the attack, yet none did anything. In reality, the attack was grossly misreported by the New York Times. There were nowhere near 38 witnesses, and many of those that did witness the attack did try to intervene. Some shouted out and some called the police. However, the misreporting stimulated important research carried out by Latani and Dali, which resulted in them outlining their 5-stage model. According to the model, the first step towards intervention is noticing that something unusual is happening. One obstacle to noticing unusual incidents is being distracted by other things. The more things that there are going on around a person, the less likely that he or she is to notice any potential emergency. The second step towards intervention is classifying an event as an emergency. Many situations exist that are ambiguous. They are open to interpretation. For example, a beggar slumped by the side of the road might have had a heart attack, or she might simply be asleep. In situations of uncertainty, individuals often look at the behaviours of others to help them make sense of things. This is particularly true when trying to decide whether or not help is needed. If no one else looks concerned in a situation, then individuals often infer incorrectly that these other people believe that no help is needed. People forget that other people's thoughts and feelings are not always obvious from their expressions, and that these others might actually be just as confused as they are. The collective misinterpretation of group feelings is known as pluralistic ignorance. That is, everyone believing that everyone feels one way, when in fact no one feels that way. It happens when people try to infer other people's feelings from their expressions. Pluralistic ignorance can be overcome by discussion, that is, by asking other people what they actually think, instead of trying to infer their thoughts from their behaviours. The third step towards intervention is to take responsibility for providing help. Paradoxically, the more people that there are present in an emergency situation, the less likely it is that any one individual will offer assistance, and the longer it will take for them to offer this assistance. This is due to a phenomenon known as diffusion of responsibility. Diffusion of responsibility is the belief that the more people who are present in a situation, the less one is personally responsible for events that occur in that situation. That is, people assume that they don't need to help because someone else will. This belief is magnified if there are people in authority present, such as police or emergency services personnel. In such situations, people believe that the authority figures are more responsible for helping than they are. The fourth step towards intervention is being able to help. In many emergency situations, specialized skills are needed in order to render assistance, for example, resuscitation skills or first aid knowledge. If individuals do not have these skills, then they cannot help, even if they want to. It is very common for children to be present at emergencies. Their parents often have medical emergencies. It is equally common for children to do nothing in such emergencies because they do not know what to do. The fifth step towards intervention is offering assistance. One obstacle to offering help is the audience inhibition effect. The audience inhibition effect is the reluctance to offer assistance for fear of looking foolish in front of other people. People are often slow to help because they are worried that they might have misinterpreted the situation, and they fear that they will be laughed at if they have misunderstood things. Another obstacle to offering assistance is the victim's deservedness. People are often reluctant to help people whom they think are unworthy of help. For example, people might not help drug addicts because they think that they are entirely to blame for their own misfortunes. A third obstacle to offering help is excessive cost. People are often reluctant to help if the costs of helping, such as losing time or getting involved with the police, outweigh the benefits of helping, such as receiving praise. If all five steps are satisfied, then a person will offer help. Otherwise, no assistance will be rendered. The next social relation that this presentation will look at is prejudice. A prejudice can be defined as a preconceived opinion of someone or something. That is, an attitude that is not based on actual experience. A prejudice is a prejudgment. It is a judgment made about a person or a thing made before actually interacting with that person or thing. For example, a woman might decide that she likes a man before she actually gets to know him. Prejudice can be positive, negative, or ambivalent. A positive prejudice is a favourable prejudgment. That is, judging someone or something to be good or pleasant or nice before getting to know that person or thing. A negative prejudice is an unfavourable prejudgment. That is, judging someone or something to be bad or unpleasant or nasty before getting to know that person or thing. An ambivalent prejudice is a prejudgment that has both favourable and unfavourable elements. Prejudice can lead to discrimination. Discrimination is the act of treating people differently depending upon their social grouping. For example, treating a man differently just because he is Mexican, or treating a woman differently just because she is old. Discrimination can be either positive, treating a social group better than everyone else, or negative, treating a social group worse than everyone else. There are many causes of prejudice. One cause of prejudice is stereotyping. Sometimes people automatically prejudge others based on widely held beliefs about that other person's social group. For example, the stereotype of nurses is that they are kind, considerate, and caring. According to research, for example, Fox 1992, it is very hard for us not to judge people based on these stereotypes. It seems to happen automatically. Thus, often people prejudge others based on stereotypes because they cannot stop themselves from doing so. For example, a man might believe that nurses are kind, considerate, and caring, and so like a woman who is a nurse before he has even met her, because he cannot stop himself from applying the stereotype. Another cause of prejudice is self-enhancement. Sometimes people prejudge outgroup members unfavourably in order to boost their own self-esteem. Social identity theory states that people categorize the social world into groups to which they belong, in-groups, and groups to which they don't belong, out-groups. The theory also holds that people derive some of their self-esteem from being associated with successful groups, so they become motivated to view their in-groups as being superior to out-groups. According to social identity theory, prejudice arises when people unjustifiably evaluate outgroups negatively in order to boost their own self-esteem. For an example, an NDSU student might judge a UND student to be unintelligent before she has even met him to help her feel superior to him. A third cause of prejudice is unfamiliarity. Sometimes people prejudge others negatively because they are afraid of the unknown. People tend to be apprehensive about the unknown. We tend to be wary of things that we have little experience of because those things might be harmful. This holds true for people as well as objects. We are fearful of people or things that we are unfamiliar with because they are potentially dangerous. Accordingly, sometimes people prejudge others negatively simply because they are afraid of the unknown. That is, people prejudge others negatively because they are afraid of strangers. The first person to systematically study how to reduce prejudice was Gordon Allport. As a result of his studies, Allport developed what is known as the contact hypothesis. The contact hypothesis is the idea that under certain conditions, direct contact between antagonistic groups will reduce antipathy. That is, if you bring two groups that dislike each other together in a particular way, then relations between the two groups will get better. According to the contact hypothesis, the ideal conditions for contact between antagonistic groups are: 1. Regular personal interaction. It is better if the contact involves individuals from each group regularly talking to one another. That is, not just being around one another, but actually communicating with one another and doing so often. 2, equal status. It is better if the contact occurs in circumstances that give both groups equal standing. That is, if the contact takes place on neutral ground and is between individuals who hold an equivalent position in society. 3, cooperation. It is better if the contact involves individuals working together towards a shared goal. That is, if the contact necessitates individuals from each group having to unite in order to achieve something that they both want. And 4, authority support. It is better if authority figures do not tolerate any disrespect during the contact. That is, if authority figures clamp down on any intolerance displayed by individuals during the contact. An example of the ideal application of the principles of the contact hypothesis is illustrated by the case of the 1947 Brooklyn Dodgers baseball team. The Brooklyn Dodgers were the first Major League Baseball team to include an African American in their lineup. When Jackie Robinson arrived, some of the players were actively racist. A petition was circulated demanding that Robinson be removed from the team, and many of the players signed it. However, the president of the Dodgers, Branch Rickey, knew all about the research of Allport and applied Allport's principles to his team to try to reduce racism. Contact between black and white players involved talking on a regular basis. They talked every day throughout the season. The contact situation afforded everyone equal status. The black and white players met on the neutral ground of the baseball stadium or training ground and were all paid similar amounts. The contact involved working together towards a shared goal. The players had to unite in order to try and win games. And acceptance was encouraged by authority figures. Both Branch Rickey and the team manager Leo Durocher clamped down on any signs of inhospitality shown by his players. For example, Durocher tore into player Fred Walker in front of the entire team when he found out about the petition that Walker had been circulating. As a result of this approach, racism within the team was virtually eliminated by the end of the season. A final social relation that this presentation will look at is aggression. Although definitions vary, the definition of aggression that will be used for this class is any form of behavior that is intended to harm or injure an object, another person, or oneself. Harm can be physical, injuring another person, psychological, upsetting another person, or material, damaging property. This definition includes acts that are intended to harm even though they fail, for example, swinging a punch that misses, but excludes acts that inflict pain but which are not intended to harm, for example, administering an inoculation jab. According to evolutionary theory, aggression is adaptive. That is, it promotes survival and the passing on of genes. Aggression can promote survival and the passing on of genes in many ways. For instance, aggression can be used to take resources from others. For example, animals might fight over food. Aggression can be used in defense. For example, an animal might fight to fend off a predator. And aggression can be used to fend off sexual rivals. For example, a male might fight another male for access to females. Feshbach, 1964, distinguished between two types of aggression, hostile aggression, and instrumental aggression. Hostile aggression is the intentional use of harmful behavior in which the goal is simply to cause injury to the victim. Hostile aggression is triggered by anger. It results from people losing their tempers. Hence, hostile aggression can be seen as being impulsive or hot-blooded. For example, a soccer player might lose their temper and swing a punch at another player after being fouled. Instrumental aggression is the intentional use of harmful behavior in order to achieve some other goal. Instrumental aggression is triggered by planning. It results from premeditated calculation. Hence, instrumental aggression can be seen as being deliberate or cold-blooded. For example, a soccer player might deliberately trip another player in order to stop them from scoring. There are many theories of aggression. According to biological theory, aggressive tendencies are influenced by neuroanatomy, biochemistry, and genes. For example, research has shown that there is an association between the size of a person's amygdala, the emotional processing part of the brain, and their level of aggression. That is, the smaller a person's amygdala, the more aggressive they are likely to be. Aggressive tendencies can also be influenced by biochemistry. Research, for example, Edwards and Kravitz, 1997, has shown that there is an association between serotonin levels and aggression. That is, the lower levels of this neurotransmitter, the more aggressive a person is likely to be. Research, for example, SOMA 2006, has also shown that there is an association between testosterone levels and aggression. That is, the higher levels of this hormone, the more aggressive a person is likely to be. Aggressive tendencies can also be influenced by genes. It is estimated that approximately 30% of the variance between people's levels of aggression is due to genes. One gene that has been specifically linked to aggression is the MAOA gene, which is located on the X chromosome. This gene produces the MAOA enzyme. There are several variants of the gene. Some variants produce low levels of the enzyme. Some variants produce high levels of the enzyme. People with the variant of the gene that produces low levels of the enzyme tend to be more aggressive than people with other variants of the gene. A second theory of aggression is learning theory. According to learning theory, aggressive tendencies are learned. That is, we acquire knowledge of when, how, and against whom we should aggress. One way in which we can acquire knowledge is via trial and error. Trial and error learning involves trying out different methods of achieving a goal until a successful one is found. With regard to aggressive tendencies, a person might learn a specific aggressive behavior via trial and error, by accidentally being aggressive and finding out that it works. For example, a person might accidentally bump into someone on the subway and find that it allows them to board a train quicker. Thereafter, they might deliberately bump into people in order to have a faster commute. Another way in which we can acquire knowledge is via social learning. Social learning is learning through interaction with others. This might be via instruction, listening to the guidance of others, via feedback, getting responses from others, or via observation, watching others. With regard to aggressive tendencies, a person might learn when to be aggressive via instruction. For example, he or she might be told that he or she should be aggressive when playing sport, but not during everyday life. A person might learn whom they should aggress against via feedback. For example, he or she might be praised for being aggressive towards enemies, but scolded for being aggressive towards friends. A person might also learn how to be aggressive via observation. For example, he or she might acquire the knowledge of how to throw a punch by watching someone else do it. The most famous studies into the observational learning of aggressive tendencies were carried out by Albert Bandura in the 1960s. Collectively, these studies are known as the Bobo doll studies. In a series of experiments, children were exposed to a model, usually an adult, acting aggressively towards a play doll named Bobo by punching and kicking it. The model, the adult, was then either rewarded or punished for his or her aggressive actions. That is, the model was either rewarded with candy and praise or punished by being spanked or scolded. The children were then allowed to play with the doll themselves. Many instances of aggressive behaviours resembling those of the model were recorded in both the model rewarded and model punished conditions. If you see the photo in the slide, you will see a girl copying the model by punching the doll. This indicated that imitation of aggressive behaviours was taking place. In addition, it was seen that children imitated models who had been rewarded for their behaviour more than models who had been punished for their behaviour. This indicated that the children had remembered both the actions of the models and the consequences of those actions. That is, the children were more inclined to imitate models who were rewarded for their actions because the children expected that they too would be rewarded for their actions. A third theory of aggression is frustration-aggression theory. According to the frustration-aggression hypothesis, hostile aggression is caused by frustration. In its original formulation, Dollard et al. 1939, the frustration-aggression hypothesis stated that only frustration causes aggression and that frustration always causes aggression. However, both parts of this statement can be criticized. Firstly, it is not just frustration that causes hostile aggression. Sometimes people are aggressive when they are provoked, sometimes people are aggressive when they experience pain, and sometimes people are aggressive when exposed to social pressure. Secondly, frustration does not always lead to aggression. We all face numerous frustrations in our daily lives, such as missing buses or not being able to find groceries or losing in sports, and we don't respond aggressively to all of them. For these reasons, the frustration-aggression hypothesis was revised. In its revised format, Berkowitz 1989, the frustration-aggression hypothesis states that hostile aggression can be caused by any upsetting event, and the more upsetting the event, the more likely aggression becomes. The revised hypothesis asserts that hostile aggression can be triggered by any circumstance that arouses negative feelings. These circumstances are not just limited to having an anticipated goal blocked, frustration, but include a host of other negative events, such as exposure to pain, to heat, to noxious smells, or to a disliked person. The revised hypothesis also asserts that the degree to which a person is upset by a negative event determines how likely he or she is to be aggressive. For example, if a sportsman lost to a better player, an understandable and fair frustration, then he would not be very upset, so he would be unlikely to be aggressive. However, if he lost to a cheat, an unfair frustration, then he would be very upset, so would be highly likely to be aggressive.